The panel that interviewed candidates for the next National Director of Public Prosecutions last week is now deliberating on who to recommend to President Ramaphosa for the top NPA post. Now, 6 advocates, Nicolette Bell, Adrian Mop, Andrea Johnson, Polisile Kanyile, Hermione Cronje and Menzi Simelane took the hot seat last week to make their case, and the president is expected to make the appointment by January, when current NDPP advocate Shamila Batohi's tenure ends. Let's take a look back at how those interviews went and whose performance stood out. Legal analyst advocate Modidima Mannya gives us his perspective. All right, so we've got him on the line. Good morning, advocate.
Good morning, and how are you?
Very well, thank you, and how are you?
Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Advocate Mannya, for our viewers who may not be familiar with this position, can you just start by explaining what the National Director of Public Prosecutions actually does and why this appointment is being described as one of the most critical in South Africa's constitutional democracy right now?
Yes, the Constitution makes provision for the existence of a National Directorate of Public Prosecutions. These are the people who prosecute criminal offenses throughout the country. As you know, in every court, magistrate court, high court, you will find a prosecutor. Now, the head of this institution is referred to as the National Director of Public Prosecutions, and you will find the Director of Public Prosecutions in the various provinces, and you will find Deputy National Directors of Public Prosecutions for specific functions. So it's critical as part of supporting constitutional democracy, which is upholding the law and ensuring that perpetrators and people who break the law are brought before are brought before the courts. They are prosecuted in a fair and transparent manner.
Now, as a legal expert, can you walk us through how this appointment actually works, from the shortlisting that we've just seen to the advisory panel's role to President Ramaphosa's final decision?
Look, the power to appoint the National Director of Public Prosecutions is that of the President. And there are two things that, since the President, this current President took over, he seems to want to have a process which at least appears transparent. And in the current circumstances, a panel was established, which is basically an advisory panel in the sense that they will consider all the applicants, receive the nominations or applications, consider them, make a recommendation to him. More or less along the same lines that we do when we appoint judges, except that that is a prescribed constitutional process. So what would have happened is that they would have advertised that there's a vacancy for a national director. A panel would have been established. As you can see, it was chaired by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, and it had as members the various heads of the Chapter 9 institutions, the Auditor General, Public Service Commission, the Gender Commission. Now, it is that panel which will make a recommendation to the President. Whether the President is bound by their recommendation and views is another matter. I suppose even after they give him the report, which I understand has been submitted on the 12th, the President would probably, with his advisor, still consider what is the best position to take.
All right. Now, several candidates were questioned about leadership, independence, prosecutorial strategy from a constitutional and rule of law perspective. What are the non-negotiable leadership qualities that the next NDPP must possess to safeguard prosecutorial independence?
Well, look, in addition to meeting the requirements, academic, professional, and experience, the most critical issue really is the integrity issue. It's whether this person is capable of acting in a fair, transparent manner, as the Constitution says, without fear or favor. But that is subject to a host of variables, as you may know. We know what has happened to Mr. Vusi Pikoli, who was suspended on the eve of having the National Commissioner of Police arrested. There was a process. He was found not to have committed any offense or misconduct, but he was nevertheless released. Now, it's about the individual itself, but it's also about whether the system will create an environment that is enabling for that person to act independently and without fear or favor.
Now, Advocate, the panel received 281 public comments across all candidates, with 209 directed at one candidate alone, Andrea Johnson, and 208 of those being objections. So what does this unprecedented volume of public opposition to a single candidate tell us about public trust in the NPA and the selection process?
Well, it means exactly that. And I think what we must appreciate, and everybody who is a state functionary and they occupy these positions at all levels, even at the lower levels, must appreciate that with our history and the background and what we have observed, the public is a bit more conscious, it's more alert, it's more involved, and of course, because the process is transparent and people are able to say that. But as you know, the National Director of Public Prosecutions and that office has always been entangled in difficulties for the longest time. I mean, if you were to compare it with the Auditor General and you compare it with the South African Revenue Services, you will see that it's lagging way behind. But that was part of the campaign that we know to, dismantle the law enforcement agencies. Now, the objections against Ms. Johnson obviously must be also linked to her performance at the ad hoc committee. But it also says, people are saying, we don't want anybody that we have got the slightest doubt that they are capable of acting independently, properly, carry out the law. Remember, the National Director of Public Prosecutions is the functionary who can decide whether me or you sleep in jail tomorrow.
Right. Let's talk about another candidate. Menzi Simelane argued the Constitutional Court never declared him unfit and that Genwala only made comments, not findings. Now, is this semantic distinction legally valid?
Look, it's semantics, it's not semantics. Again, it goes back to whether the public would have trust. I mean, if adverse comments were to be made against you, the fact that they are not findings, that doesn't mean that they are irrelevant to public perception. You see, if we take it from the point of a pure legal point of view, then there's nothing wrong. But if you look at it from an ethical point of view, there might be some valid concerns.
Now, the DA has threatened to interdict any appointment from this process, specifically because Simelane was shortlisted. Does his inclusion on the shortlist fundamentally compromise the entire process, as the DA argues?
Not at all. I think the DA is a bit of a spoiler. Remember, this process was opened to the public for comment, and that's why you had those 200 objections. And as I understand, the DA has not raised an issue. But as I say, legally, all the candidates who were shortlisted and interviewed meet the minimum requirements and therefore capable of appointment. Now, to simply come and, want to soil the process without being an active participant, and we must, condemn in the strongest terms, because these political parties are in parliament. They are represented in parliament. They have got the mechanisms to ensure accountability. They fail to do so. After we have voted for them, they come back to us to complain to us when we are supposed to complain to them. But I don't think there's any validity in the DA. I think it's just petty political posturing.
And what additional questions should be asked of candidates about preserving prosecutorial independence from political interference, especially given South Africa's recent history of allegations of capture within justice institutions?
As you understand, it's the same story when you talk about corruption. You have the corruptor and the corruptee. If there's political interference, it would not, the national director would not politically interfere in his work or her work. It will come from somewhere. So the real problem should be whether the political establishment will allow whoever is appointed to carry out his duties without any form of interference. So, but at the same time, you must bear in mind, in the system itself, because the national director is just but one functionary, there are thousands of prosecutors and other functionaries there who may be busy themselves with their own things in their own right. So the need to have integrity from the national director to the lady that cleans the office or the gentleman that cleans the office is very important. So it's not just about one person. is the entire system and how it responds to the public need and public interest.
Well said. Now, this appointment will shape South Africa's ability to prosecute corruption, organized crime, and gender-based violence for the next decade. What should ordinary South Africans be watching for in whoever gets appointed?
Well, this appointment will not, by the way, because, corruption, and I think we keep on shifting the goalposts. Corruption starts in our houses. It starts in our streets, in our villages. These people who are doing all these things, crime, come from us. We buy stolen goods, and we expect one single policeman to be solving the problem that we also create. Now, this is a national issue. The political establishment must do its job. Civic society must do its job. The functionaries must do their job. And this is why you find across the board, whether you go to, and you have seen the issues around Ekurhuleni, the things that have come out of the Madanga Commission demonstrates a failure on the part of the system. How were these people appointed? What do we expect if people like that are appointed into the position? So I'm simply saying, and I'm not taking away from the responsibility of whoever is appointed, but that person operates within the context of a society that seems to have completely lost its moral compass.
Now, before I let you go, and very briefly, President Ramaphosa will make the final appointment from the panel's recommendations. Now, if you were advising the president, what would you tell him about what this appointment means for South Africa's constitutional democracy over the next 10 years?
Well, look, I mean, I would probably say to him, Mr. President, please go and read the Constitution, and in particular Section 195, because that sets out the values. And whatever decision you take, bear in mind that amongst others, South Africa deserves a professional national prosecutions authority. South Africa deserves a prosecuting authority that will operate without fear or favor, which means that it should not be interfered with. South Africa expects to have a national prosecuting authority that will prosecute people fairly. I don't think we want a situation where we question ourselves whether this one is charged rightly or why is this one not being charged.
Advocate, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
That was legal analyst, Advocate Modidima Mannya. And up next,